Thumbs up. Great. I'm going to look at this from, and a little bit of what the previous presentation went through, talk a little bit about quality by design. But I think the overall structure to this, this session is, what are those things to consider when we're building this data integrity program and focusing on the culture of the organization, not necessarily the data integrity attributes, if you will. A little bit about me in this process. I've been around this industry for a number of years. Been working in manufacturing, clinical, GLP space, pretty much from drug discovery all the way through to post-manufacturing type of activities. Have a lot of experience in implementing computerized systems and how they perform not only their functions, but how they manage that data. And that's something I've always focused on and have been very important to me. So what we have to focus on is, we have to first define what data integrity is and what the data integrity program really is. And these are defined by PDA, right? Data integrity is defined as the maintenance of and the assurance of the accuracy and consistency of data over the entire life cycle, not from the moment that you create it, but more so when you need it, right? When do you need that data? How are you going to use that data? And those of you who have reviewed MHRA's guidance on data integrity, we get into Alcoa and Alcoa Plus, right? The complete, consistent, enduring, and available is the true drive to what that Alcoa Plus component is. So in looking at that, we then look at the overall program, and it's not just an add-on to the program. It has to be integrated into that program from a quality management system, right? We provide that foundational assurance, right? That the data in the company uses to demonstrate that the products are safe and effective. CISPQ has been demonstrated throughout for all of the regulatory requirements. And even more importantly is, where did that data come from? How was it moved? How was it accessed? Was it changed? And is that data what we expect it to be? Or do we have some doubt and some unforeseen changes to that data? It's not the simple, cross out initial and date process. We have to look a little bit broader at the possibilities of how that data can be modified and changed. So what do we want that data program or data integrity program to look like? Perfect, right? We certainly would love to have that program that's top notch and drives to that completion. But there's a big difference between excellence and perfection, right? And there's a lot of people that confuse perfection and excellence, right? When we strive for excellence, we have to have high standards, right? And in general, there's nothing wrong with having those high standards. But in fact, that can be a good thing, right? And continuous in pushing us to drive. They can also, these high standards can also encourage us to make improvements, solve problems, and do quality work. But we have to look at perfectionism, however, is an impossibly high standard. We can't be perfect 100% of the time. And when you look at perfection, there is no room for any imperfections and no compassion for mistakes. And I don't think any one organization that's represented in the 27 folks that are on the call believe that they are a perfect organization. I always say strive for 80%. If you're 80% perfect, that you're moving in the right direction. We have to get them sometimes up from 20%. So in this case, we don't want to strive for perfection. We're going to strive for excellence. We're going to look for, that crawl, walk, run, sprint, and then fly. Because again, we have that progression. We're going to start out very immature. We're going to learn to walk. We're going to learn to run. We're going to learn to sprint. Will we ever fly? Who knows, right? But at least we have that strive to get there. And to me, it's more about culture in an organization. and we take a look at, building that program, we're going to make sure that culture is sound, right? That quality culture, you may have heard that term in the past. You have that organization that's built for success. Is everything in place? Do you have all of the, you're not going to have everything in place at first. Again, that's part of the maturity, right? It's part of the growth as you start going through this. And if we look at a culture where quality is at that forefront, what we have to do is get complete buy-in from the entire organization, right? There's no I in team, right? So you have to get everybody on board to make the progress to go forward and really grow your organization from a quality position. And then your data integrity program will follow from there. It has a lot to do with ethics too in the back, right? So let's take a look at pursuing quality instead of compliance. And when we focus on compliance, we just try to get by, right? We start, try to provide us the liability for future audits, get through that single audit, make decisions without data, right? How many times has that happened? Open up unnecessary risk by fixing one hole and fixing one problem. You open yourself up for unnecessary risk, right? Reactive fire drills, being very reactive and not proactive. But when we focus on quality, we're focusing on a little bit different, right? More productive and innovative. And I like the word innovation because that really grows with an organization. Start receiving fewer complaints and investigations, open fewer CAPAs in the process. So as you start going through this activity, you start, seeing that, hey, well, we have a lower quality related product cost. We're freeing resources to do other creative things, right? Innovation, creating that innovative process. Right? And then last I have there, mitigate the risk leading to higher business value, right? If we mitigate that risk, our business is going to go through the roof. I used an example the other day of, for those of you who, I don't have any references from the UK, but, a piece of bubble gum, right? A piece of bubble gum that that you've had since you were a kid. You take that, you take the bite of that bubble gum, that it's going to last 5 minutes. That there's going to be highly, the sugar rush is going to hit you right at the first rush of it. It's going to last for, a couple of minutes, taste good. And then at the 5-minute mark, it's done, right? But what the quality of that product is, what the lasting nature of that product is. And you may just want that initial rush, or do you want something that's going to be longer term, right? And it's different levels of quality, different focuses on the different quality attributes that your organization will put forth. Right? So if you take a look at this comparison, it shows you what it is to just be compliant, to fix things, get it done, plug the holes, be reactive. Whereas on the focus on quality is being proactive, being prepared, focusing on the customer loyalty, the employee loyalty, the confidence that, hey, if I make a mistake, it's okay. It's not accepted, but it's okay. We can get by. We'll make do and correct the problem. Whereas if you're focusing on compliance, you're trying to fix that. And at the end of the day, when you fix a problem, you could very well be introducing yourself into more problems in the process. So how do we build that quality culture, right? I haven't talked much about quality. I haven't talked much about data integrity here, right? But here's where we have to focus on how we build that quality culture in an organization. Maintain that leadership emphasis on quality. Where's that message from quality coming from? Is it coming from your mid-level managers, your lab managers? Is it coming from a vice president, president, CEO of an organization? What are your core values? Does your organization have core values? And although this doesn't sound important, it is very, very important. Because if everyone believes this, and if everyone drinks that Kool-Aid, so to speak, then everyone is on board with that, what the goal of the organization is, what those core values of the organization is. And it's driving from the top down. ensuring your message is credible. A lot of times organizations will just, there'll be lip service, right? They'll talk. And, behind the curtain, there's a lot more going on. And when we go through this process and we give that message, we want to make sure that message is credible. We want to make sure that the message actually applies to the organization that they're working in. If you train on data integrity, for instance, you want to make sure that the examples are related back to that particular functional area. Right? You don't want to drive examples, for a manufacturing group that has to do with clinical quality assurance. You want to make sure that that message is credible to that particular part of the organization, because it's a lot more believable at that point. This is probably my favorite part of this whole part of building culture. I go back to the adage of it takes a village, right? It takes a village to raise children. Here, we're looking at the same process. It takes a village to bring in quality. It takes a village to ensure data integrity. Include your peers. And my favorite part of this one program I implemented a few years ago was not necessarily management doing the training. It's your peers, your associates within the organization, because it gives someone the ability to go to a peer and not feel like they're getting their hand slapped if they have a question, or a silly question, if you will. So if you encourage that peer-to-peer communication, that peer-to-peer training, you're going to have an all-star in any one part of your organization that focuses on quality that you can always respond to. Now, conversely to that, if you have someone that isn't in a quality mindset, they can truly degrade how your overall quality culture will be, right? If they're the one person that's going to try to get by and meet compliance, do just enough, they're likely to cause more problem, because if I'm a peer of that individual and I see that they're doing it, I may start to do it the same way that they're doing it, or acting the same way that they're acting. So it's very important to find those peers that are going to be your all-stars, that are going to be your biggest cheerleader, your biggest proponent in this quality culture. And then last is bringing it back to empowerment, and empowering everybody to have the ability to make decisions, to move processes forward, and give them the credit where credit is due. Right? If they have that ability to be empowered, certainly you have to set a group of boundaries, or a set of boundaries, whereas they know where their capabilities lie, but give them those boundaries so that they can make those decisions in this process. Right, so four points. The picture there gives you just a little bit more, right? But there's a lot of ways to build quality culture. Which is extremely important in this overall picture, right? So as we start to implement this data integrity program, so we've built that quality culture. We've had the message come from the top down. It's credible. We've allowed people to make their own decisions. We've had the peer-to-peer relationships. Now we can start building this program, right? It starts first with your corporate policy around data governance. And data governance has, all of these bullets that are here in this circle, plus a lot more, right? They're can't fit that many on there so that it's visible to everyone. But what you have to look at is, how do we work with data? What are the types of data? What's the metadata around the data? How do we manage it? How do we back it up? Is there master data anywhere in this process? So you really have to have a strong understanding of what your data governance program looks like and what your data is. It's one thing that I always start with when I start implementing a system. Tell me about the data. What do you want that data to do today? What's it going to do tomorrow? How about in 5 years from now? How do you want to use that data? because it has a lot to do with how you manage it, where you store it, how you can retrieve it. Oh, I'm locked here. Now, back from the previous presentation, I liked your depiction of how you go through the plan, do, act, or plan, do, check, act process, right? Where you plan, do, the check is your study, right? And where we focus from an industry perspective, where our focus isn't on that study, it isn't on the check, it's more on the planning, and which is good, but it may not be the best location that you want to focus on. But everything that was talked about in the previous presentation of quality by design, we're looking at that same type of process for designing these processes and systems with a level of intent, right? That level of intent has to be, how do you want to handle the data? Where do you want that data to go? How do you want to manage it? What about security? What about privacy? What about functionality of the system, right? That all has to be defined prior to. Now, we purchase a lot of systems from suppliers, right? From vendors. That's not a bad thing. Hopefully they're doing a lot of this designing with intent, the quality by design, but it's not always the case, right? So it's really important to focus on that as you start implementing these types of programs. I can't say this enough. It's my background. It's my passion. Ensure the validation program is solid and robust. Make sure that it can handle all types of systems that you have within your organization. Right? Exercise those programs. If you're just starting out and you're developing a validation program, take examples of each of the systems and see how you would treat them, walk through them as a desktop exercise, as a software as a service, as a platform as a service, as just hardware that you're managing the applications and supporting the applications that are on that hardware. If it's a local implementation, if you're hosting that system, understand how that system can be validated. And I just got off a call a little while ago. We were talking about the computer software assurance, right? And the testing strategies there. Testing strategies are very, very important to understand as part of that validation program. It will have a lot to do with how robust your data integrity program really is. Can't say enough about risk management. Has a lot to do with the CSA process. Has a lot to do with validation in general. And we're in a very challenging organization as we go through this process to implement around risk, because the risk that we're looking at, in a lot of cases, people will look at risk as the risk of not getting caught. Hey, I'm not going to validate, so I'm going to take the risk of not doing this type of testing or this type of validation, or scoping it out of a validation process through risk management without truly understanding how that data will be used. For instance, if it's a research system and that data somehow supports a regulatory submission, or if the data winds up in a regulatory submission, right? So you really have to have a solid risk management process to truly understand where your risks lie and where your failures are likely to occur. Training, and do some more training and some more training. The more that this is front and forward in any organization, it will benefit the masses, right? If you continue for employee onboarding, if you have it as departmental meetings, if you're in manufacturing, you're doing Gemba walks, and talk about data integrity. Training isn't necessarily just sitting here like we're going through now. It's that informal type of meeting, your Gemba walks, your laboratory, weekly laboratory meetings. Talk about data integrity issues that may have come up during that previous week or previous month. And it's not to chastise your colleague. It's more to make sure everyone understands what happened and that it doesn't happen again, right? And if it's preventable, what was the mitigation that we went through to prevent this going forward, right? That's how you build that quality culture. Auditing, going back and looking at the program and here's the check, right? Go back and audit that program and then come up with the action plan. Study it. Make sure that you understand everything that you're looking at. Are your risk assessments being conducted properly? Is your validation program solid? Is your quality by design or your design, your systems with intent functioning well? Is that part of maybe a vendor management program? So there's a lot of different components to this around the process itself. But then you're going to also audit systems for data integrity. Right? DI is fairly straightforward, and the next few slides I have are going to look at that with a little bit more detail and things that you should focus on. But you still have to audit your systems for data integrity. Especially if the systems haven't gone through, you've rewritten your validation program, you've rewritten your risk management program. Those systems may have been missed in their functional activities and their quality attributes that they're reviewing. So you still have to audit those systems for data integrity. And then obviously revise, your program as you need to do that. So we know some of the areas of focus, right? GDP, good documentation practices. Results on paper, even more important when you start using a hybrid solution, a hybrid computerized system where you have some data electronically, you have some data in papers. Make sure that you have a solid foundation for GDP. We look at audit trails, right? And there are different types of audit trails, right? There's audit trails around data review, and then there's audit trails around your system and configuration. Right? Make sure you have processes in place for both of them. It's all part of that data review process. And also, if you don't have a mechanism within your system that shows that someone looked at a particular records audit trail, make sure you have some level of documentation to support that audit trail was reviewed. Looking at file formats. How easy is it to change data within a file format? A lot of the electronic systems are not that easy because they're proprietary data formats, especially around laboratory equipment and laboratory systems. But some databases, not so much. They're fairly straightforward text files that are stored in tables somewhere. Can they be changed? Will they be changed? Do you have any data encryption? Data encryption when the records are moving in a clinical trial environment, GDPR, very important to ensure that you have, motion type of encryption. And what about that files at rest? Now, the last thing that we want to hear is that someone has, been pulled into some ransomware, right? Somebody locked down all of your data because you didn't have the proper encryption or the encryption wasn't that strong. So it's making sure that we focus on maintaining that data throughout the entire life cycle of that data product. Data security. Who can access that data? Where can they access it? A lot of times you have, organizations that open up the entire data files and data folders. Is that good? How are you securing that data? And these, this ties back to user access control. Do you have that role-based system in place for your computer systems and the applications that you're running, not only from a Windows perspective, but an application perspective as well? Data lifecycle, I can't encourage this more. It's something that is always focused on. If you can focus on that data lifecycle, you can find out a lot about these other areas of focus as well around metadata, for instance, and understanding what data about the data is part of that process and the collection of that data to be able to interpret it. And where is that data maintained, the metadata? Data backup and storage media. A lot of us, these little things here, right? Flash drives. I don't know if you can see it too well. They play a big role in data management, believe it or not, especially when you get to clinical sites. Hate to say it, right? But if they don't have policies on these little things, you can really lose a significant amount of data. And sometimes it can get into the wrong hands. Backing it up on here is maybe acceptable, but make sure that the proper risk assessment has been conducted in order to get that data backed up. Wrong one. Handling of source data and raw data, and knowing what each of those data points are. Where is your source data? Where is your raw data? Your source data for a particular data set may be processed data from the raw data. So understand what source data is and what raw data is in this process. Unauthorized access, breach control, right? Understanding who has access, should they have access, and preventing unauthorized access. Access privileges for each user role goes into user management. For chromatography systems, looking at whether or not you have test injections. Very, very important, and there's a lot of findings about test injections, at least from the FDA, and the ability to to trace them. Next up, you have all of the stuff around audit trails, and what happens if you have an older system that doesn't have audit trails? How are you protecting that data? Is the process one that writes that data to a write once, read many directory or file folder? Because if it isn't, you may have a hard time to say whether or not that data has changed from the time that it was created to the time that it was reviewed. Different types of integration is part of a chromatography system. Very important to understand that. And then looking at that standalone versus network systems. How do you protect those standalone PCs, especially in the laboratory or in the clinic? It all depends on how that data is being maintained and managed. There's a lot of different data protection mechanisms. How are you doing it? And it's certainly an area to focus on. So we do talk about risk, right? So a lot of it is predicting. We look in that glass ball, right, or the globe that's behind me here. We look in that glass ball, and where's that risk? What are we looking for? Is it going to happen? Where is our vulnerability? Where is it that we're going to fail around data integrity? We try to predict it. Sometimes we're good, sometimes we're not so good. But just like in validation, where there's no possibility to test everything, right? High degree of assurance. In here, we have to have a high degree of assurance that we've assessed all of the risk, right? And this, I guess, goes into the planning component of it. Plan as much as we possibly can, right? Then we have to look in that preventative activity, right? How do we do that? Well, quality by design, validation is part of that preventative activity, all of our security and encryption around that. Our training is a big part of how people understand what they should do and what they shouldn't do, right? How's data getting from external sources to our internal organization, GDP? How do we enforce good behaviors, right? I mentioned this before, and this is an important part to this overall program, important part to quality. Right? If you're going to be slapping the hand of someone every single time that they make a mistake, is it truly that individual that's making the mistake? Or are the procedures such that they're not adequately clear? Or is it a complex process that is prone to error? So you have to be able to enforce good behavior. And again, if I'm a lab person, I'm much more comfortable going to one of my peers and asking them a question, because I don't want to get my hand slapped, as opposed to going to my supervisor, right? So how do you reward that good behavior? Hey, we didn't have any deviations this month. Well, that's great, but guess what? They hid 3 of them because they didn't want to report them. Is that enforcing good behavior? Possibly. It's paying someone off, in my opinion, right? If you give them a lunch or there's no nights out anymore, but or dinner somewhere. That's enforcing good behavior, but make sure that the enforcement is warranted, and it's not because they're trying to hide things or they have hid things in the process. Right? And this is where monitoring comes in, right? How do you identify these issues? Is there something upstream or downstream that could tell you a little bit about the current process? And is it something that can mitigate the risk downstream by not doing something in the immediate future? How do you detect them? There are a lot of different ways to do that. Data review is one of them. And then respond, right? Efficient management of efforts to develop the policy and address the audit findings, if you have any, right? This is part of the auditing of that program, auditing of that process. How do you make those corrective actions? Or if you do have a data integrity problem that is a very complex process, how can you simplify it as part of your CAPA, as opposed to penalizing the person that keeps creating these errors? And the CAPA reads, needs, human error, the individual needs to be trained further. That's not a response. That's not fixing the root cause and really identifying that root cause. Right? So very, very important that we go through this entire process and factor this into our overall data integrity challenge, or our data integrity process. So overall, we do have management challenges, right? We have that developing and then maintaining of that quality culture is extremely, extremely important in the overall program of data integrity. We want to implement that solid risk management process, right? Risk management is not easy. It's very difficult. It involves a lot of critical thinking, right? And if your team isn't versed in critical thinking outside of the box, maybe that's a process you focus on next, right? We focus on access control and security. If we can prevent someone from getting in and messing the data up, that's what we want to focus on. The second is reviewing that data. How do we do that? And how do, because this bullet by itself over the course of a given year could equate to a single FTE, but it's spread out amongst your lab personnel, right? That's a lot of time. So it's taking them away from, again, remember, allocate individuals to do better, more innovative things, more productive things as part of your organization. If you can mitigate this risk by making sure those audit trails are there, make sure that they're easily reviewed, you can free people up to do other things, or bring in that one resource that can work with you. Right? And then the other challenge that the organizations and management has are aging systems that don't have the audit trail, systems that don't have the security capabilities. They're not in the latest technology. So as we start walking through this, these 5 bullet points are certainly the challenges to designing this overall management process around data integrity and building that data integrity program out. But hopefully throughout the presentation, I've been able to give you some examples on how to mitigate some of that, right? So with that, thank you very much. If there are any questions, you can either connect with me on email, on LinkedIn, on Twitter. You can visit our website, and there's a chat box there that you can send a message out, and we can get back to you